if you could, switch off your microphones and switch off your cameras for the event, that would be really, really useful. Thanks. And later on, if you have questions, we can address the questions, but we're going to use the chat function. So if you can, later on, when the presentation's finished, we'll invite questions and you can use the chat function, and we tend to think that works quite well. Okay then, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Paul Carter. I'm Senior Lecturer in Pharmacy at Sunderland, but I'm also Chair of the Hope Winch Society, which was established in 1984. And with that has the role of connecting with ex-students of pharmacy from Sunderland. So it's a large part of the alumni organisation. So and it does have another role as well, and that is to raise money for the Hope Winch Benevolence Fund, which is a fund that we have to help students who find themselves in financial difficulty during the studying in the course. So so contributions are always welcome to the Hope Winch Benevolence Fund. So yeah, so it's 100 years since Sunderland. Can you? Yeah. It's 100 years since Sunderland opened its doors to students to study pharmacy. So as I'm sure you know, we're celebrating our centenary year this year. And this event is part of a series of events that we've had throughout the year. Now, if you've missed any, don't worry, they've been recorded. And if you want to go to some more, because we have more planned, what we'll do is we'll put a link up just in case you've missed it. We'll advertise a link that you can use to get details. So yeah, so 100 years of pharmacy at Sunderland. It was Hope Winch, as I'm sure you know that, opened the doors in 1921. So I think it's really fitting that we celebrate by exploring a pharmacy that was around kind of in Hope Winch's day. So I'm really looking forward to this. So I'm going to pass you now to Matthew, who is the product development manager at Beamish, and he's going to take you back in time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, as Paul says, to Beamish Museum. We're here in County Durham. We're a large open-air museum. We're over 350 acres in size. And as Paul says, we tell the stories of the everyday people, right from the 1820s, right through to the 1950s. And we're even building a 1950s town at the moment as the museum continues to expand. So we did celebrate our 50th anniversary last year in very different and very difficult circumstances. Because the museum first came around because a gentleman called Frank Atkinson had an idea of trying to preserve the history of the Northeast by bringing it to life. So it was an open collection policy. He would basically, if you had anything that you'd be kind enough to donate, the museum would take it from you. And from Frank's idea grew this enormous museum that's one of the largest attractions in the country now. And in 2016, we built this building that I stand in now, which is our Chemist that you're going to hear all about today. So the reason that I'm speaking to you today is because last year, for the first time in the museum's history, the gates had to be shut and we weren't allowed to let visitors in due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're a charity and 95% of our income comes from our visitors. So it literally wiped us out at that point. So we came into the site, there was very limited people. We have a few residents that live in the houses that the visitors can see here. And some of the commercial team came back to come up with ideas that we could fundraise. And we did everything from delivering afternoon teas to setting up an online shop, which you could buy things that the visitors would normally buy in the Chemist that you get here all about. we started selling our sweets in places like Phoenix and looked for really sort of creative ideas. And one of them was the use of digital. So for the first time ever, rather than using steam power, we thought we would invest in some modern equipment, which is how I'm speaking to you today through this Zoom and the cameras. And we did everything from Victorian school lessons where children could join, and we would look after the homeschooling for an hour or two by having a very scary headmaster look after them, right through to Father Christmas doing 13 hours a day of Zoom calls, speaking to the children who would have normally come to see him at Beamish every 10 minutes. So because of that, we have this modern technology, and through the kind invites from the university, we've been able to put on this event today and broadcast live from the Chemist. So I have two colleagues with me today who are going to do the majority of the talking, but what I'll do is I'll look out for any questions towards the end, and I can facilitate that and ask them. You see, these people are Edwardians, so I'll try and do a bit more of the modern stuff. So we'll hand over to them as we pull this camera around here. I'm sure they'll give you both give you a wave there. So at the back we have Carl.
Hello there.
So Carl is one of our engagers. He's in costume every day, working in the Chemist and various other buildings in the 900s town here. So visitors can really go into the buildings, they can explore them, they can see real objects brought to life. So we have, rather than a pretend pub, we have a working pub, for instance. We have a horse stable, we have a bakery, a sweet shop, and you can explore all of these buildings and speak to people like Carl who are in costume doing a day-to-day job. So you'll be hearing from Carl a lot today. And also Rosie. So Rosie is our keeper of social history. So it was fundamental in setting up this building and doing a lot of the research. And as she's about to tell you, some work with the university. So I'm going to hand you across to Rosie and to Carl, and I'll watch out for your questions in the chat. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Matthew. Hello there. This building was built, as Matthew said, in 2016. It sits in between the Co-op on Beamish High Street and the bakery. So probably one of our most iconic buildings and one of our tastiest, I would argue. And it was a funny little corner plot that we had space for the building. And that's because both the Co-op and the bakery are actually from the same village. And the museum had chosen to build them in the same location compared to each other as they would have been originally in Anfield Plain, which is the village they came from. So as I said, we had this funny little corner plot. And there is a funny little corner building, L-shaped building at the end of Elvet Bridge in Durham City. So that's how we chose this building. It's actually a copy, it's not one that's been translocated. And it was never actually a chemist, it was a pub. And we do have, if you ever come in, a gorgeous carved column that used to be situated in a pub. So that's a little nod there to its history. At the museum, the corner building houses two businesses. One is W. Smith's chemist shop, and the other is John R. Edis, photographer. And what's nice is when we look in Smith's prescription books and his sales books, we can see Edis's name come in. So we know that he was purchasing some of the chemicals that he required for developing his photographs and things from Smith, which is nice to see. Neither business is operational in Durham anymore, although there are a couple of branches of Smiths in villages around Durham City. So there's one in Ushelmore and one in Eschwinning. And to be quite honest, this chemist shop would not have been possible without Sunderland University pharmacy department. The bottles, beautiful bottles that you can see behind Carl here, they're made of glass. They've got gilt labels. They're all original. They're from chemist shops from all around the northeast and also into Cumbria. And they've been kindly donated over the years, and have been sitting on shelves in our climate-controlled dark stores. And they've been fine, but we did have real concerns about the safety of staff and visitors bringing them in into the building here, where we couldn't really control the climate in the same way by any stretch. They still had, some of them still had substances in. We didn't understand the abbreviated Latin on the labels either, so we weren't sure what was meant to be in the bottles, or indeed what was in the bottles was actually what was meant to be in the bottles. And this is where Southern University stepped in, and Paul and Adrian very kindly agreed to clean them for us, so that they are nice and safe and able to use. And then Paul came in and helped me fill them with whether it should be liquids or powders or waxy substances, so that we could, so they look correct. So very grateful for that. And also we got a trip out to Sunderland University as well. We got to don our white coats, which is very exciting. Got given a tour of the lab and shown a few really traditional techniques that Carl will show you a bit later on. I thought I would start by talking about generally health in the Edwardian period, some of the conditions and diseases that chemists would have been helping people to tackle. Then we'll move into some of the techniques that they used and products that they made. And then we'll finish with how you train to be a chemist back at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1913, the life expectancy for men nationally was 51, and for women it was 56. And in some urban areas, infant mortality could be as high as 20%. It's pretty grim times to be alive before antibiotics. So if you'd reached adulthood, you're actually pretty lucky. And the chemist and druggist was very key in helping people stay healthy, I guess. The chemist and druggist industry really started to boom during the Industrial Revolution, when traditionally agricultural communities were upping sticks and moving to the cities to try and get jobs in industry and factories. When they would have been living in the countryside, there would have been remedies and medicines that would have been recipes for which would have been handed down through families, and also there's this concept of a local wise woman who would have, again, she'd have been the person that everybody would go to if they had health troubles. Because visiting the doctor would have been a very expensive thing to have done. The NHS did not come into play until 1948. So when people moved into the cities, as I say, they needed somewhere to buy some of these herbs that maybe they didn't have the space to grow now that they were living in the city, just for these traditional medicines that they would have made themselves. There's a Mr. F. Harrison who gave an oral history to us. He was a chemist druggist at the turn of the 20th century, based near Bishop Auckland, and he remembers selling pennyroyal and slippery elm to the old woman in Eldon Lane. And Eldon Lane is a village near Bishop Auckland. So these women were still kind of in existence at the turn of the 20th century. They probably would have been the prime source of maternity care for working class women. They would have helped to lay out the dead, and any young ladies that got into trouble, they might, if you get what I mean, might have gone to her as well. Hence the pennyroyal. In terms of healthcare, you could buy your own insurance, generally through trade union and friendly societies. So you could you'd pay a subscription, and then if you needed to call on your policy, you could do that. But by 1911, the government wanted to nationalise this. So Lloyd George called it 9p for 4p. So out of your wage packet, you would pay 4p towards the new national insurance scheme. Your employer would pay 2p, and the government would add 3p there. And that would give you an insurance coverage of, sorry, bear with me, I'm not very good at remembering numbers. Value of 9 shillings and sick pay for up to 29 weeks, and also 30 shillings for maternity cover. So this was a real kind of step change for working people, and the chemists and druggists were absolutely valuable at this point, because any doctor's prescriptions that were given through the national insurance scheme couldn't be dispensed by anybody other than a chemist or a druggist. So that's when their business absolutely rocketed at the beginning of the 20th century, just prior to the First World War. Some of the diseases that would have been tackled, would have been prevalent, included things like diphtheria. There was a vaccination created for that towards the end of the 19th century, but it wasn't really until the early 1920s that there was any vaccination program to deliver that. TB, of course, was a big killer. It's an estimation that in the UK alone during the 19th century, it killed up to 20 million people. Of course, you could survive it, but equally it could come back, and it would really weaken people's constitutions as well, so they might be more likely to pick up other bugs and diseases and infections. Typhoid was still kicking around as well. That was passed on through water and through contaminated food. And often the carriers wouldn't know that they were carrying it. So it was a classic case of Typhoid Mary, granted in the States, not in the northeast of England. But she was a cook, and she every household that she was employed by just got ill, and some of them, her employees actually died of typhoid. And eventually she was tracked down and told that that she was probably the carrier, but she didn't believe them. I think also being a cook was her livelihood, it was her way of earning money. And so naturally she just wouldn't want to give up that trade. So she just kept going. I think they eventually did catch her. In the UK, there was a different way of dealing with people who were silent carriers of typhoid, and they were just popped into a local asylum, which doesn't sound great, to be honest, so I can see why you'd keep it secret. Smallpox actually was still around during that time period as well, despite the fact that Edward Jenner had come up with a vaccine sort of towards the end of the 18th century. So it's sort of 100 years later, you're still getting epidemics. There was one in 1902 in inner city London. So Edward Jenner noticed that dairy maids who caught cowpox weren't getting smallpox, so designed a vaccination that used cowpox to prevent smallpox, which is much deadlier. And finally, malaria, which is quite a surprising one. Always surprises me how kind of prevalent it was. You catch it through stagnant water, through I think rotting waste as well. And you can imagine what early 20th century inner city would be like. These places would be rife with mosquitoes that are capable of carrying the malaria virus. And they did have a cure for this. British soldiers in India had come across quinine through tonic water, and so they brought it back home. So quinine was available through your local chemist shop by that point. Now have a look around the chemist shop. On the left-hand side here, you can see these beautiful drawers with gilt lettering. Some of them are from a shop in Carlisle. And again, we faced a very similar problem to the bottles. Thankfully, they didn't have any unknown substances in, but they do have beautiful gilt labels with, again, abbreviated Latin on. We're not scientists by any stretch, we're social historians. Again, we were quite stuck as to sort of what they meant, what we could put in them. And through the sterling work of one of our volunteers, Helen, who trained as a pharmacist herself, she's retired now. She did a lot of work helping us to decipher what should go in and what would be safe to keep in here. So as Matthew was saying earlier, we try to recreate not only the look, but also the sights, the smells, the sounds. So some of those drawers, they smell and smell really quite potent. I think menthol's my favorite. If you've got a bunged up nose, just stick your head in there. It's quite powerful. So we've got the bottles here. Different bottles would have had held different types of substances dependent on the properties of those substances. So bottles with a smaller neck would have been for syrups and liquids. We've got this one here, which is a wider necked bottle, and that would have been for holding powders. They're easier to pour out and they wouldn't all come out all at once. This one I think is quite interesting. I'm sure you can see. It's a volatile bottle. And originally it would have had a stopper inside the top of the bottle and then this funny little glass balloon cap. And that would be for, like I said, volatile liquids, which if conditions meant, like environmental conditions meant that they were going to pop their stopper, the stopper, instead of flying halfway across the shop and taking somebody's eye out, they just bash into the little glass balloon here. It's quite fun. And got this green ridged bottle as well. During the Victorian period, green glass would have been used for bottles that had poisonous contents as a bit of a warning. By the Edwardian period, moulded glass was available. So moulded ridged bottles tended to hold poison so that you could tell just by touching, or if you were partially sighted, you'd be able to know straight away, do not drink. Okay. there was actually little restriction on what chemists could sell in the shop. Arsenic and strychnine in particular were still being used for household cleaning, for pest control, even fungicides for farmers. And there was a lot of debate actually for about 50 years in Parliament between protection, I guess, of the community and reducing the risk of murder, rates of murder and suicide through using readily available, very powerful poisons, versus the freedom of the individual and the freedom of chemists to sell what they chose and of individuals to buy what they required, which is quite interesting. And I think sort of still relevant today, that kind of libertarian idea. And it also means that so they also didn't have to declare what it was that they were giving you in any preparations that they made. Individual chemists might have their own cures and tinctures and ointments and balms, and sometimes they would maybe sell them in just their own shop, or they might sell them in a little chain of shops locally, or sometimes they even reach national proportions. So this is a laxative roboquinine tablet. It's to cure a cold in one day. And you start to get these sort of quack cures coming through. And I'm sure if this worked to cure a cold in one day, we'd still be using it. Who knows what was in here? It could be anything. We know that levels of cocaine and morphine in particular, really addictive substances, would go into quack cures like this. And in 1908, the British Medical Association started to get a little fed up with some of these because they'd be coming out left, right and centre all of the time, advertised in the backs of ladies' magazines and things. All you had to do was write off a little note to get them. So who knows who you were giving money to and what they were sending you back. And so they investigated and they looked into what these substances contained. Again, social historian, I have no idea how they did it. But they eventually ended up publishing the recipes in a book called Secret Remedies. We do have a copy of here at the museum. And a lot of them were revealed to either contain zero active substances whatsoever. So it would do you no bad, but no good either. And you're just wasting your money. Or, as I said, it would they contain alarming levels of addictive substances. Maybe so you keep buying them, or maybe because they just make you feel better. I don't know. And Carl's going to come and show you some of the traditional techniques that we learned at Sunderland. Nowadays we take tablets and capsules much more frequently, but that didn't really come in until the 1940s. Before then, we're very much looking at liquid preparations, a lot of things you would drink rather than just swallow, and pills. So I'll pass over to Carl.
Hello everyone, so my name's Carl. As Matthew's already described, that my day-to-day job is very much running the Chemist and role-playing it as it would have been. Now, one of the best things about this is the idea of revitalizing what we have been doing for the last 100 years. Using natural sources has always been a really great idea of developing these cure-alls and things like that. Let's not forget the word drug does come from a Dutch word droog, which actually you'll find is the translation in English as dry plant. So it was very much a case of using some really interesting, but also everyday stuff, stuff that you'll find out in the wild, plants, fruits, roots, stuff like that. Now, to develop different sort of drugs, we have many different techniques, one being a pill roller, which I'll just quickly show you from description. I use this every single day. Now, of course, if I'm lucky enough to get an apprentice, I'll get him to do most of the grunt work, but essentially by putting certain ingredients together, such as things of soaps, we have things like cinnamon, or you have chamomile. These are everyday things, but remember, it's about making you feel better, right? So again, going back to the cure-alls, it's not so much about focusing too much on whether it's going to actually do the thing that you wanted to do. You might have a headache, you might feel sick. Well, of course, two people are going to get the same ingredients, but the reality is you trusted me. You trusted what I would do. You were trusting the idea that a chemist would always look after you. And so therefore we were very much focused on doing some very natural things, but in the everyday stuff, it really became quite simple as using such a pill roller. Now, of course, it did come in many different ways, but the important thing is not to let this stick. So this substance is going to be almost like a cakey-like substance. Once it's rolled out, you want to make sure that that will stay together and won't bind back together. So you have something as simple as a wooden sphere, as you might be able to see. I do have some nicely coloured balls there. Now, they are white, so I tend to use a little bit of powdered sugar in this one particularly, but or you could use shellac. Shellac's very common to use in nail varnish and acrylic nails these days. But simply by making sure that's on tightly and just giving it a good shake. You know, this is a sort of simple thing that we would do, but of course, pills were one of the best ways of administering medicine because it was easy, effective, and very little that could go wrong. As long as you stuck to my remedy, of course, I'll only tell you to take maybe say 2 a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening sort of idea. Although there was a case around about the early Victorians where some people would start to take their own dosages and it did get a little bit out of hand. But luckily we've reined that in and most people will kind of stick to what I tell them to do, which is always good. Don't want you living in fear, but I want you to make sure that this is the reason why you come to a chemist. You know, most things you might be able to find in your own kitchen today, but the idea is you're paying for the knowledge, you're paying for the experience of someone being able to guide you and look after you in the best way that you could. Now, there are other ways of administering medicine. Now, this wonderful piece of equipment here, I'll see if I can just quickly undo that. So I'll give you a side view. Now, these would administer as suppositories. Now, suppositories are always going to be quite one of those things up there that can be used in many different ways, sometimes children, sometimes boys and girls, and sometimes your cattle. It is very much a working class environment in North East, and we do rely on a lot of work in the farms, and so therefore you will be tending to look after your animals as much as you would do your children. So that they're perfect for a child, of course, but you might need something slightly bigger if you're dealing with your horse or your cow. Now, of course, I only make the stuff, so don't worry, I'm not getting involved in any shape, way, or form when it comes to working with those animals. I'm going to let the vets do that. Although we did have a nice range of veterinarian medicines, as most of us did see the idea of working with animals and humans alike, very similar. Now, we do have quite a few things, but I will demonstrate just a little bit, or at least show you in any way, that essentially sometimes things could be as simple as a powder. You know, you don't need to overexcite it. You just need to make sure that it's simple. Now, as you can see, this paper has been folded quite interestingly. Now, of course, as you can see, it's just a standardized powder, but you want to make sure that this will definitely stay together. If this falls out, you're going to lose a lot of your medicine, which of course in 1900s, that's going to be very difficult. Now, of course, I'm getting a bit shaky, you know, because camera's a bit nervous, you know, but as you can see, that will hold together when I'm behind the scenes and I'm in my own comfort zone, of course, naturally. But of course, like I say, nice simple remedies, simply powdered pack there. That's gonna, as you can see, I might have got it right this time, and it won't fall out, of course. So that was very interesting to make sure. Now, of course, there's also different techniques that you can use, and one being an ointment base. So as you can see, I won't disclose what's in the jar, as it can. My chemist, my rules, and I don't like to explain too many of the ingredients I like to use. But as you can see, simple powder, but then I'm going to use a base of an animal fat or a lard, or any form of like cream of an ointment I can use. And it's really not that difficult. I'm just going to make sure that they're evenly dispensed. I want to make sure that the ointment will work overall. Now, of course, sometimes going back to whether or not it worked or not, some of the ingredients that we tend to use are very simple, but again, are they going to work? Well, you know, this ointment that I've been selling you, for example, may not be exactly what you'd like, but it will get the job done. I do tend to use a lot of menthol. Menthol is a fantastic element because it smells nice, but it also has a cooling agent on the skin. Now, the thing about that is it's automatically going to tell your brain something's working, and suddenly you will feel better. Now, of course, if you did want to know some of the things in the jars back there, I do have a lovely jar that has the word Adepts written on it. Now, Adepts, most people wouldn't think twice. It's just another ingredient to the cream I've been selling you for years. Now, unfortunately, if I wrote that in English, I'd have to write the word pig fat. Now, that's not necessarily something that many people want to rub all over the face, but it will, in fact, do the job. So again, going back to almost reiterating what we've already said with the idea of using Latin and using things that protect the knowledge, but also control what you know and what you need to know sort of thing. Now, we did mention Kerrison early on, and I do have a lovely range of different things that Kerrison actually put together. We've been very fortunate to have this donation from K80. a journalist who was quite happily to let us use the book. And of course, as you can see, we have a lovely selection of lip salves, white rose perfume, and cold creams, which most people recognize as more along the lines of a moisturizer. Now, again, you would say, well, this is not medicine. It's not really going to make you better in terms of illness, but sometimes it wasn't about that. Sometimes it was just simply about making you feel better. Again, the fear of not being able to afford a doctor, not being able to actually go and see a doctor in general. You know, of course, we may end up going to war next year. If that's the case, we're going to lose a lot of bodies, and so therefore doctors will be a hard thing to find. So you're going to really rely on the source of a chemist, but then sometimes it's not about feeling ill, it's about just feeling generally good. Now, of course, we do like to use a product that we call carbolic soap. Now, carbolic acid is something that we've been using from the very early Victorian era. Now, the thing is, it does have a very pungent smell. A lot of people do comment when they come into the chemist today, I do actually have it in a cup, so that the visitors can actually have a smell of it. Of all the things I do actually sell today, we do sell quite a good amount of carbolic soap. This is nostalgic. This is about remembering a childhood because it's such a strong smell. But of course, keeping in mind, if you came into my shop and you smelled that, you knew immediately that this is a very clean shop because it's about that smell. So whereas some things I actually make and design them to smell nice, I actually leave the carbolic exactly the way it is because I want you to recognize it. But the thing is, if you use carbolic every day, sorry, ladies, but it will be a problem with your hands. You're going to find that whether you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're mending, this is going to be very difficult because it's going to dry your hands out. It's going to make it sore. You're going to have very tender hands. So of course, relying on things like cold creams. So if you've got a cream from me traditionally, might actually be kind of heavy, be like a nappy cream. I might even have to wrap it up, whereas I can't really afford to do that with this. So essentially we actually start using things like cocoa butter. Now that's something that will go into the hand very easily. It's very delicate, also smells nice. And of course it will get the job done in context to what the carbolic was actually doing to your skin. This will actually hopefully not so much reverse it, but it will combat it if you use it before and afterwards. Now keep in mind, in fact, I may leave you on to Rosie again. Actually, Miss Smith, our local teacher down the street there, she's going to need a cough drop shortly. So I'm just going to nip off and make some of them. So if Rosie, if you'd like to come and join me again, thank you.
Cheers, Carl. That was really helpful. Thank you. Yes, Carl was talking about Mr. Kerrison's book. He also contains a couple of recipes for female pills. They're two completely different recipes. They're called the same thing. What they're for, bit of a mystery. Reading around the subject a little bit, it could have been anything from hysteria to period troubles to menopausal symptoms. Who knows? Other thing that women might come into the chemist shop for might be disposable sanitary wear. It had actually been created towards the end of the 19th century, and there were two brands available. There's one from Johnson & Johnson and Kotex brand as well. And it was it was quite a hard thing to research actually, because it's something that people were very quiet about and very reticent to talk about, let alone write down and record. So it took quite a bit of digging out, but they actually would put little honesty boxes almost on the counter, and you pop your money in, and then the person at the shop worker behind the counter would note what you'd done and slip you a packet over the top of the counter. And chances are actually the kind of ladies who would be able to buy disposable sanitary wear probably had a maid to go and buy it for her. So zero embarrassment all round, apart from maybe for the poor maidservant. Most women probably would have just still been using rags at this point that they would just wash at the end of the month. Training to be a chemist. Carl mentioned he'd quite like an apprentice. Maybe one day. We might be able to afford one. So you'd have apprentices you'd find here, you'd find assistants, and you'd also find the pharmacist himself. The apprenticeship could last anything from 3 to 5 years. You're learning on the job. There wasn't a particular course or anything that you had to pass. You just had to have the knowledge in your head in order to pass your minor certification. And that certification was controlled by the Pharmaceutical Society. After working as, once you passed your minor certificate, you could then be called a chemist and druggist, but you weren't allowed to dispense anything that was poisonous or addictive. You weren't allowed to own your own business either. you then had to take your major examination in order to get the ability to own your own business and to have the responsibility of dispensing poisons and to be able to call yourself a pharmacist. Sorry, bear with me. And the 1911 Act, when it said that everything actually had to be dispensed by a pharmacist, which led to a huge rise sort of post First World War, really, of people wanting to pass their major examinations. And this is when you start to get more and more university courses. Hope Winch was, who your founder was a lady who would have trained at that time. So I think she did her course in 1912. So there you go. There were a lot of women who were starting to train to become to work in chemist and druggist shops towards the kind of the end of the Edwardian era into the First World War. So from 1901, we can see that there were, on the census, there were 3,105 women working in these shops. And by 1911, you're looking at 5,390 women. So that's an increase of 74%, whereas the number of men increases only by 5%. I think this is partly maybe to do with National Insurance Act, but also I think to do with campaign for the rights of women to have the vote. I think it increased a lot of the chatter and talk in society of what actually women were capable of doing, what their brains were capable of doing. And I think some more enlightened people thought, okay, maybe they can cope with a little bit more science. I think chemists as well was it's a safe area for women to sort of tiptoe into, because it's still in that sort of healthcare and caring sphere, whilst obviously being incredibly scientific at the same time. So it's just, yeah, a bit gentler with getting women into more varied forms of work. And said Hope Winch, she trained in 1912, she trained at the RVI in Newcastle, and that was for her minor certification. She worked in Wigan for 3 years before going down to London to train during the First World War to get her major certification, at which point she returned to the Northeast. And it was in 1921 that she first established the course at Sunderland Technical College. She had a cohort of 25 people, 21 of whom were ex-servicemen who'd managed to get a funding for the place to study pharmacy full-time as a result of money from the government to do that, being ex-servicemen. And one of the 4 private students of hers was a lady called Ethel Adams. So this is a woman again. So we're getting there. And she, I think her wages sort of before and after the course is really striking, the difference between an assistant and the chemist himself. So she was earning 12 shillings and 5p a week before she passed her major examination. Then after, she was earning £3 a week. That's quite big. I think the Northeast has very interesting pharmaceutical history. I'll pass back to Matthew.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Rosie. Thank you very much, Carl. Hopefully everyone watching that really enjoyed that. I know I learned a lot whilst doing so. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to put them in the chat, our friend Anya is here doing some tech for us, and she's going to ask, bring them up on the screen so I can ask them. And while she's doing that, I'll just tell you as well, that the products that Carl talked about in Mr. Kerrison's range, so they're all made by a local business, a small independent business, and you can buy them on our website as well. So if you've been sort of interested from what Carl and Rosie were saying about the product, we'll put the link to the online shop in the website in the chat, and you could try the sort of famous cold cream, which actually won product of the year in 2019. So we're really proud of that one. So Louise and Sheila both learned to fold paper in Sunderland in the 60s and 70s. So
well, there you go. And I think that's probably the same time that Helen, our volunteer, was training as well. She always felt that she'd had a very, she called it old-fashioned pharmaceutical education. But she trained in Birmingham. She remembered her teacher being very, very precise as to how presentation, and so all of the paper packets had to be exactly the same size, and the bottles of tinctures and medicine and liquid medicines and things had to have a paper collar that was put on in exactly the same way on every single bottle and sealed very precisely with some sealing wax, which just sounds quite lovely, really.
So please do come and see us, and you can check just how well Carl's doing on the paper fold and make sure it's up to your standard. You'd be more than happy to do that. And one of the questions was asking about recording. So we are recording that, all this modern technology, and it will be going online, so you'll be able to watch that. So yeah, it's been a great morning or a great afternoon for us. It's really exciting to do stuff like this, but please do come and see us in person. There's only so much we can do sort of through the camera, but what we'll try and do is welcome you to the museum at some point. So we're just having a look at the other question, which is, do you know anything about the records for Spanish flu treatments?
I'm afraid I don't. I'm very sorry. All I do know. Oh, go on.
While though, I think that one of the biggest problems with Spanish flu is that obviously it happened around about the 1915 era. We're well at war by this point. So one of the biggest problems with Spanish flu is that a lot of the British and the Americans weren't necessarily wanting to advertise too much about having it, because it would have absolutely destroyed morale. It would have actually done a lot of damage toward what we were trying to do in terms of the war. So that's one of the biggest downfalls with Spanish flu, is that they weren't exactly too upfront about what the issues were and exactly how severe it was. Hence, unfortunately, the thousands, in fact, millions who suffered through it for the longest time.
Yeah, in fact, more people died of Spanish flu.
But it certainly wasn't Spanish.
The First World War.
That really leads to an interesting fact as well, is that with our museum, we are about bringing the past to life, so we don't have sort of signs like you'd say in a traditional museum, so we can be asked anything at any point. So for instance, we have a dentist, and regularly we get dentists coming in there who often teach us stuff as well, so it's as much about talking to the sort of visitors as it is learning from them. So I mean, Carl, you'll be able to
as far as what I know today, a massive amount has come from Beamish. It's come from the research I've done personally, but absolutely anyone can walk through this door, and very much a case of if it is someone who is even training today or someone who's been a pharmacist their entire lives, it's a fantastic introduction to what we are selling here in terms of history, because you have things like Andrew's liver salts, we have Sloan's liniment, all things we still use very much today, which of course for them, it was almost a new and up and coming thing. So again, point of views are fantastic in context to someone who actually does it for a living for the last 50 years, especially considering my knowledge is very based on early 1900, always expanding. You never know what you're going to get when you open the door. Always good.
If we don't know it, then we'll sort of go find out and make sure that it's accurate. So yeah, there's a massive amount of knowledge in the team, and a lot of Rose's job is making sure that knowledge is sort of researched and comes through and brings that to life. So
yeah, I think quite what you're saying. I think we often will also retell stories that visitors tell us as part of our engagement. It's not chemist related, but when I was working in the bank once, I was talking about some people being quite suspicious of it. This gentleman was telling me about when he was an apprentice painter and decorator in the 1960s. This little old lady asked him to move her bed, and he lifted up her mattress, and it was just covered in white fibres that she's completely forgotten about. So yeah, it really does kind of help bring the history to life.
So yeah, please do come and see us. If you visit the museum once, you get a pass for the full year. So if you move into Sunderland, then you can jump on the bus and you can come and see us every weekend for the price of coming for one day. We do different events, and the chemist is constantly changing. We just about to bring Christmas into here. So
absolutely, yeah.
Christmas product. So yeah, please do come and see us. You've been watching Carl, Rosie, myself, and Anya behind the scenes. So if you come and visit, please do ask. It'd be lovely to sort of put a face to the name, quite literally. So thank you very much for joining us and for being involved, allowing us to be involved in this event. And hopefully we'll see you here in the future. Thanks very much.
Bye, guys.